Tonight promises to be an engaging and interesting conversation, and a very relevant one as we talk about racial injustice, the Christian response. We know this is a very relevant topic considering all that has happened in recent time, especially with the protests and rioting that has been happening in America due to the death of George Floyd. And with all this confusion and this new conversation concerning racism, I thought it would be good for us to have this discussion and also to put some biblical emphasis on it and see what conclusion we can come to. So I look forward to hearing from you guys as I share too, along with my guest speaker, evangelist Dr. Chris Curry, who's a professor, author, and a historian, and who has written numerous articles on these topics. Next slide. So this is the format we're basically going to have tonight. We'll have a dialogue and a discussion. First, we'll have an introduction. What is racism? And then I'm also going to give some definitions on terms that we would encounter in this talk, including racism, discrimination, prejudice, colorism, xenophobia, classism. Then we'll have Dr. Curry, my uncle, present on a historical and modern perspective on racism. And then we'll look at some case studies, look at some recent incidents that occurred in America concerning racism. And then we're going to talk about personal encounters and experiences with racism, both locally and internationally. And finally, we'll look at the Christian response and see what the Bible says about race and racism, and of course, we talk about solutions going forward. So like I said, racism has taken the spotlight that COVID-19 once held. On every news channel, you see they're talking about the riots, they're talking about the protesting, the looting. You keep hearing the name of George Floyd, unarmed black man who was killed by ex-police officer Derek Chauvin. And this recent murder, because it was caught on camera and the nature of how it occurred, it has caused major social unrest and challenges and demands for justice and retribution in America, as well as chaos. You know, America is our neighbor, and everything that happens there has a direct or indirect impact on our own country. So what happened in America has also sparked new interest and conversations regarding racism in our own nation. Like I said, the topic is racial injustice, the Christian's response, and our goal tonight is to discuss racism and all its related entities. We now have some definitions of racism as well as the origin of the term race. Race is a social construct that sought to divide human beings into 4 groups based on similar biological and physiological traits or characteristics. However, the term does not have an inherent physical or biological meaning. So in taxonomy, which is the field of science related to classifying organisms, you know, we have 7 groupings of all organisms. You have the kingdom, class, order, phylum, family, the genus, and species. Race goes even below species and further separates human beings into these 4 groups that you have here. And we know the human species is known as Homo sapiens, but what race does is further differentiates between the genus species Homo sapiens, which are human beings. So the 4 races we have are Negroid or the Negroes, the Australoid, which is a group that's mainly centered in Australia and known as the Aborigines. Then you have the Mongoloid, which are the Asians, and finally the Caucasoid or Caucasians, which are the whites. So this term, race, was first coined in somewhere around the 17th century, and it's important to note that it's a sociological term, and it's a social construct, and it doesn't really have any basis in science. Next. So our vocabulary, racism. Racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's race is superior. Prejudice is an affective feeling towards a person based on their perceived group membership. The word is often used to refer to a preconceived, usually unfavorable, and it's important to note the unfavorable and negative connotation that goes along with this word. But you basically evaluate another person based on their political affiliations, their sex, their gender, beliefs, their values, social class, age, disability, religion, sexuality, race, ethnicity, language, nationality, beauty, occupation. Is a whole list of things that prejudice can ascribe to. It's a very broad and general term. Then you have discrimination. This is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of race, age, and sex. Discrimination occurs when individuals or groups are treated in a way which is worse than the way people are usually treated, based on their actual or perceived membership in certain groups or social categories. So discrimination is a bit more specific than prejudice. Next, we have colorism, which should be an interesting thing to talk about too in the Bahamian context. But colorism, also known as shadeism, is a form of prejudice or discrimination, usually from members of the same race, in which people are treated differently based on the social implications from cultural meanings attached to skin color. So it's within the same race. Next, we have xenophobia, which is the dislike or prejudice of people from other countries or foreigners. And finally, we have classism. And classism is the prejudice or discrimination based on social class. It includes individual attitudes, behavior systems of policies and practices that are set up to benefit the upper class at the expense of the lower class. And that's something else we have a lot of in this country. And now I'll turn it over to our guest speaker, Dr. Chris Curry, who is going to present on racism from a historical and a modern perspective.
Brother Chris, I like how you just rolled in.
Yeah, I was here all along, you know. I was just letting Landy give his introduction, and he did a great job of defining our terms and setting the context for tonight's discussion. I want to just add quickly, we talked about race as a social construct, and while it is true that the term may never have been used until the 17th century, the concept of subjugating a group of people that would be considered inferior existed from the 15th century with the birth of the transatlantic slave trade. And so historians and sociologists and other scholars generally look at the transatlantic slave trade as birthing the concept of racism or a racist ideology, which in plantation America, the Americas where slave plantations, where slavery existed in societies, it was amplified and accelerated and became codified by law. And so we understand too that race is often constructed through the weapon of the law. And the law has often been used to create racial societies or create systematic racism or institutionalized racism. So that is why it's so important that we follow how the law has changed in different ways. Now, as I talk about racism in the Bahamas and the US, it's important to understand that there are many people, including, I suppose, my family members, those of the Caucasian race in the Bahamas, who would like us to think that when slavery was abolished and full emancipation arrived in 1838, that we moved from slavery to freedom, and slavery and racism was vanquished with full emancipation. And they would say, why are we making a big fuss about this? This happened so many years ago. That's like the distant past. They could be so far from the truth. Because the real situation that we face in this country, as we've had an unbroken history of racism, classism, and colorism that go back well into our past. And you understand that when slavery and full emancipation occurred in 1838, we basically went from formal slavery to informal servitude. And especially when you look at the labor systems, the truck, share, and labor tenancy systems, you had the white merchant class basically finding a way to keep the formerly enslaved in a cycle of debt and dependency, and a way to get them to work without being paid wages. And then into the late 19th century, we see the continuation of segregation in a number of areas. In education, we see that all of the schools were basically segregated. Private schools like Queen's College, founded in 1891, was founded as an all-white school. There was no education offered beyond rudimentary primary school or elementary school for the Black masses. It wasn't until 1925 when the government high school was finally established and as a rigorous fee-paying school that you finally had high school education extended to the Black masses. But you know, racism and segregation was also manifested in other areas. You had residential segregation in most of the offshore keys in the Abacos, and certainly off of Eleuthera in the community of Spanish Wells. Particularly Spanish Wells, where my dad's family is from, persons of color could work on the island during the day, but absolutely had to be off the island by the time of sundown or sunset. And that was rigorously enforced well into the 20th century, I might add. And if that wasn't enough, there was the denial of basic social services, from electricity, running water, access to health and hospitals, and generally you had an abysmal infrastructure in place in the colony. And so all of this played into the grievances of many of the people of color in the Bahamas. And then what made it worse was the development of tourism, because with tourism in the 1920s, you have a more virulent form of racism with American values and Jim Crowism being imported into the Bahamas by foreign developers. And so now you found Black entertainers who were playing in front of all white audiences in some of the hotels have to enter through the back door. Public transportation is segregated now, with a mailboat servicing North Eleuthera having exclusive camping spaces only for whites. But even on buses and in cars, you had the same kind of segregation. Movie theaters, restaurants were also segregated here in the Bahamas. Eventually, this became such an embarrassment, particularly as the Caribbean was opening up and was at least modeling a different kind of race model with the tripartite model. It came to the attention of some of the persons of color, or that we would call reformists like Eddie and Dupuche, that something had to be done. So in 1956, he proposed an anti-discriminatory resolution, which was not an act of law, it was a resolution, which is different, meaning it had no legal teeth. But nevertheless, people see 1956 as kind of a watershed moment in our country's race relations history. Interestingly, I will tell you that that did nothing to change the de facto forms of racial segregation and prejudice. Why do I say that? Because we still had elite social clubs, we still had gay communities emerging, we still had residential segregation along racial lines continuing well into the post-independence era after 1973. And as we think about the post-independence period, let's think about the fact that while race may have receded and class may have become more prominent, we understand that race has not been vanquished altogether. We understand we still have white enclaves in New Providence, and we still have all white communities in the Family Islands. We also understand that there is something called classism, where we have growing wealth disparities. We have the haves, like Port New Providence and Life Key, which are predominantly white, and we have the have-nots, like Maine and Grantstown and other over-the-hill communities that are largely Black. And in these Black communities, wealth inequality is expressed in a way that exposes the racism and the classism, right? Because these persons have little access to the law. When they're dragged before the courts, they can't pay the legal fees, nor can they pay for an expensive lawyer. They can't get health insurance because they can't afford it. And so they have difficulty with entering and accessing the health services that the Bahamas provides. So there are these institutional encumbrances or obstacles that are functioning in our country as a barrier of exclusion that actually suggests a kind of classism and a kind of racism at the same time. Because I would argue racism and classism are inextricably connected to each other. You can't separate one from the other. The last thing I want to say before I end my short monologue here is we also need to factor into colorism, because we understand that the psychology of colonialism has had such a negative and indelible impact on our people that we are thinking so negatively about ourselves. We think that everything that is white is right. And it goes as far and as deep as coloring of skin. Bleaching is now called what? Toning, all right? Toning or tanning or lightening. It's called for the same thing though. What it is doing is it's damaging your skin. It's actually destroying your skin. But we all do it in the name of self-hate, because that's essentially what it is. We've been brainwashed into thinking what is white is beautiful and what is Black and dark is ugly. And of course, we also understand that we're talking about concepts of beauty in relation to good hair, bad hair, or people like me who have no hair. But the idea is that, you know, people are buying expensive Remy, and it's always Brazilian. No one's buying Afro Kinky. right? Because we privilege, again, the wavy hair over, which is, of course, considered the good hair, over the thick, lovely, wonderfully amazing follicles of our Afro-kinky brothers and sisters. Color racism is also running very deep in our country in many other ways. The last thing I would talk about, and I mentioned this in the article I wrote, is about white privilege. And Landy and I are going to talk a little more about that, how it's affected our relationship. But do understand that there is, in fact, white privilege running deep in our country. All right, persons of a lighter hue, or who are considered Caucasian, have easy path through our roadblocks that are put up by law enforcement officers. When they go into businesses, it seems, and I see it all the time, the clerks and the persons who are working in these various businesses are so eager to assist and to help people like myself because they think I have a lot of money, I guess. But people like Landy are completely blindsided and ignored. And so this is just an example of how I've experienced even in my own life, and particularly when I think about my relationship with Landy, we've experienced white privilege in counterpoint to Black discrimination. And I'll end there because I don't want to take up too much time. That's my monologue.
Thank you, thank you. I think even this camera race, this keep on glitching me out. You were straight.
Wow, isn't that something, eh?
Anyway, next slide. So now I want us to look at some case studies, and it was a whole list, a whole bunch I could have choose from, but I just chose the 3 most recent ones. And George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. I could have mentioned Botham Jean, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown Jr., Sean Reed. It's a whole list. But these 3 are the most recent ones, and particularly the last one, George Floyd, sparked a huge unrest that the 2 prior ones didn't. And I want to put this question out there to y'all. Why do you think that's the case? Why did his death under police brutality cause such an outbreak and chaos more so than these other 2 deaths caused? Anyone?
I believe that they all like in the same month or something. So it's like the last straw. I think it was literally like, okay, listen, we had enough type of thing.
Okay, that's a good point. Only thing is, I think Ahmaud was in February, Breonna was in March or April, George Floyd was May. But yeah, they did occur one right after the other chronologically. Anyone else?
I think too it has to do with the pandemic, given that Black people are already marginalized and they're at a deficit in terms of resources, protection, even with the COVID, because of the conditions that they live in. A lot of them are more exposed than I would say other groups. And so with that stress already, I think the added pressure, they're fed up with the injustices that they're consistently dealing with. They can't even get help from the police. They're most likely to be a target rather than a victim.
Yeah, right. Good point. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to tap into that real quick. Definitely agree with what you, Deja, and I think that sounds like Jade. Definitely agree with what both of them said. But I think with George Floyd, his just going along the lines of videos surfacing. His video came out like the day it happened. Ahmaud, his own came out a couple of weeks, like I think maybe a month, a whole month or so. Yeah, like a whole month after. And then Breonna Taylor, it wasn't no video of it. We just heard the story, you know. So I think the fact that the video was a little bit more present for us, it struck a nerve. And then just the whole matter being exacerbated. I mean, like over the span of like 2 months, we have 3 persons being like senselessly, innocently, like blatantly murdered. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, we tired, and like everyone just tired. Like why? Like, and then George Floyd, that was the last straw, because like that was like literally a 10-minute video of just watching this boy lose his life. You see what I'm saying? So like, but that one hit the core. So like that was it.
Landy and I talked about that today, and what we were saying was, unlike the other 2 that were shot and killed by bullets, the way in which this man put his knee on Floyd's neck, and an extensive amount of time, almost 10 minutes as you suggested, and with the public there watching it. It wasn't like in the other two cases where maybe only a few people saw it. This was a public spectacle. That's why I call this a form of modern day lynching. And the pain and agony on this man's face as he's calling out for help, he's saying he can't breathe. He's actually calling to his mother. I mean, and this officer had every opportunity to stop what he was doing, but he continued relentlessly and barbarically to kill him. So I think the personalized nature of the murder, the way it played out almost like a modern day form of lynching, and the fact that he had no remorse or no recoil to actually get off of his neck, given opportunities from the public that were watching it and, you know, chiding him for it. All of that played into why this one really was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Great. Anyone else?
I think Kristen has her hand up.
I just gonna piggyback off what Chris said, but I feel like how we saw like the video, basically watching him waste away in a sense, and then watching or hearing the people who was around him like get upset and angry and try to help him by urging the police officers to take his knee from off of his neck, and hearing him cry out to his mother and seeing him in distress is what kind of tip everyone over the edge. And also, if you really watch the video, you could see the officer further pressing his knee into his neck, almost like he's gonna plant it in there. So all of that just put the icing on. It put the icing on the cake in a sense, and that's what caused all that, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. Same thing. So how do you feel about the reaction to these murders that were committed by the police, and in the case of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and by white supremacists in the case of Ahmaud Arbery? How do you feel about the rioting, the protests? Do you think the people are justified in their responses? Anyone?
Hello?
Hello.
The peaceful protests and the riots against the government buildings, I think, are perfectly fine. It's the looting and the rioting against like private property and people just trying to be peaceful and walk by, or something that's problematic.
Agreed. I
feel like,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like the long-term effect of the looting within the people's own communities is the problem, because it's like, well, I thought about here in the Bahamas, trying to bring it back to the Bahamas. People were writing Facebook posts about, oh, we need to loot, oh, we need to riot, but yet, like, we barely have money for other things. Where the money is gonna come from to build back these communities that all of a sudden, like, it's like if y'all wanna, not to justify it, but if they were thinking smartly, it would be like, okay, riot these like quote unquote white communities where no blacks really are, but I don't like promote it, but I'm just saying that's the smarter way to think, because you can't necessarily like break down your own community. But then they were saying too that the white supremacists really were the ones who were coming into the crowd during this time, and like they were the ones starting, I don't know. Like, yeah, they were the ones that were like causing looting and stuff.
There's a couple of things I wanted to say on this. I think I don't ever think that it's good to destroy property. Let me say that first, right? But I think you have to understand that there's a kind of criminalization going on of persons who are protesting by the media highlighting a lot of the looting, and it kind of takes away from what the protesters are actually all about, and the racial injustice. And the other part about it is it's interesting how so much on the looting and the property destruction, and yet the irony is, if these are white people who were allegedly doing this stuff, that might have been a different narrative. We think about social revolutions and revolutions in general throughout history. And there's never a neat revolution. Revolutions are always difficult to deal with. They're often bloody. There's often a lot of death associated with them. And there's also a lot of destruction. But no one ever questions the veracity of the American Revolution. No one questions the white man who got in boats and overturned a bunch of tea in Boston's harbor, otherwise known as the Boston Tea Party. No one questions how they ripped up stamps and paper money in challenging what they called the Intolerable Acts a few years before the Boston Tea Party. No one even questions when Europeans go into African countries or Caribbean countries and raid and take their precious artifacts and put them in their museums. I still think about that scene in Black Panther in the museum where the white lady, the curator, I suppose, is describing, ironically, these artifacts from Wakanda, which really should be in Wakanda, not there. Of course, she ends up getting killed, but that scene to me really spoke to the paradox of looting, in that we focus on these negative, almost like criminalizing Black people for things that if white people did wouldn't have that same weight. And this is one of the problems that I find with history. I want to throw one last thing, because there's obviously a disproportionate issue of justice when it comes to sentencing. In the 1820s, Helen and Henry Moss murdered an enslaved girl named Kate, who they owned, right, as enslavers. And they got a 15-pound fine. They were fined 15 pounds British currency for murder. A year or two later, Dick DeVoe took a pistol and shot, mind you, he misfired, at a slave owner by the name of Dick Hunter. Sorry, it was Joseph Hunter. Dick DeVoe was the name of the enslaved. And he was executed by hanging for that, and he didn't even kill the man. That was attempted murder, not murder. So we see disproportionate justice there. And that is the case even in contemporary societies today in America. And I think we lose sight of what is actually going on when we focus just on the destruction of property and the looting. And again, I'm not justifying or excusing, I'm not saying that I was right. I'm with you on that, Eudacia, but I also think that we need to focus on what is really going on and the importance of the protests.
If you look at it too, the media is intentionally putting more emphasis, more spotlight on the rioting more so than the protesting, because they have a whole agenda that's to demonize the Black people and to demonize their agenda and their cause. So I want to also post this. Someone had something to say?
Sister Canva had a hand up, and then Dwayne had his hand up.
Go ahead.
So, Sister Canva?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to go back on to, excuse me, someone's point about they should have organized in terms of looting the white person's area, I guess. It just goes to show that's how serious they were about it. That's how hurt they were. They didn't have time to think, hey, you know what, let's go loot that white guy's shop or whatever. They meant what they said. They were tired. And when you're pushed to that point, that's like coming home and needing something so devastating happening, you could only just snap and react. So for them to sit down, all right, let's organize. Okay, we can go look for all the white businesses and loot them. I mean, that wasn't the frame of mind. You know, you're just so mad you want to break something. So whatever came across their path, that's where they were going at it, you know?
Indeed. Anyone else?
Dwayne has his hand up.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Kenva, JK, I mean Ramon. Just for the fact that, yeah, I mean, like in the moment, like tempers were flying, like emotions was high, like everybody just was like we sick of this. I guess let's just go around and mess everything up. You know what I mean? But I mean, obviously, in the moment, that's how people react. You know, it's already done. But I think just to be a little bit more pragmatic, me personally, I wouldn't destroy no one else's property because I don't want nobody else to do that to me. You know what I mean? And you had a lot of rappers from Atlanta who were speaking to persons destroying their actual home. I mean, like this way y'all live. Like, if you all destroy your home where you're supposed to live. You see what I'm saying? So I mean, to that point, I don't think that's the way they should have went about it. But they did. They trying to send a message. I mean, I won't bash them for it. So yeah, just to that end, I just think another thing too with the media just focusing on the looters. You know what I mean? When it's mostly just opportunists who have been taking advantage of the time, the current times. Just doing what they could. I saw one woman like walking out the store with a whole mattress. Like, what the hell? So yeah, like, so you have persons who are opportunists, and you have persons who actually protesting. But like one of my old coaches said, like, what miss you don't pass you. So like, but you, regardless, you're gonna have to give an answer for whatever you do. But that's what the deal is, and that's what we dealing with at this current state.
Is it possible for me to say something? I know you're just keeping the hand raising. I don't know how to do that.
It was Bradley and Eric, then you could go keep. Bradley,
Okay, cool.
Eric, and you.
Okay, good.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, just a couple of things. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. One, yeah, the media's been biased from time. People have known that, except everybody just accepted it now because now they see that their side is no longer being favored by the media, but they've been biased for decades. Second, they do need to be careful with, the rioting and the looting and such, because from what I've seen, well, for one, you don't want to say that you're for justice and then commit acts of injustice. That would make you no better than the government. Two, you also have to be careful because I've seen videos of people, of business owners, particularly showing up armed and ready to shoot people when they trespass to try to raid their business. And I saw one video of a guy who got shot and two officers were trying to give him CPR. He eventually died and the person who was defending their business got arrested, but they do need to be careful. And more people are buying guns. So, if you think you get to just do anything and there are no consequences, well, the innocent who you commit an injustice with will strangely get justice a lot quicker than you. So be careful.
Good points.
Yeah, this is
Eric?
Hello. So I just wanted to give a perspective to someone who's still living in the States, where there's rioting and the protesting. So from the beginning, the riot, how I feel about it is when, because I'm like completely surrounded by Black people, the problem I see is that when Black people get upset, the first thing that we do is we don't normally think about the consequences that comes afterwards. So we just, it's like a big flex of muscle. We just, rile up, get angry, and we just, we act on, that impulse, on the emotion. So that's why, in Minneapolis, when the rioting happens, there are people who saw that as an opportunity to just, what's the word? Kind of just throw things for a loop, kind of change the narrative of what the protest is. So now, like, the protest is now divided up into like 3 different subgroups of protesters. You have the peaceful protesters. You have those who come to, like, they're just violent, like they want to start fights, and then there are those who are opportunists, like who just want to come once the looting happens. There are actually people who don't come to the protest. They park in front of stores waiting for someone to break in. Then they go inside, take whatever they want, and then just leave. They have nothing to do with George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or any of the nonsensical violence, from police brutality. So, and the media focuses on that because now it's no longer about, reform. Now, the media, they're all about the next big story. So when you're protesting about a crime and then you commit a crime, they don't see the crime that happened past. They're now looking at this, what's being done now. So of course it's going to change the narrative, which gives Trump and the government the opportunity to capitalize that and send in the National Guard. Just 2 days ago, I had to get dropped home from a friend because I had to leave my apartment because they set fire to a store that's connected to my apartment building. So I had to evacuate the next day. And to get back into this area where they were protesting, the National Guard has the entire area blocked off. And if you're not showing your ID, if you come up there with the wrong agenda, they will turn you around pretty much. So like, you know, it's getting to a point where they have to organize themselves. They have to fight people within their community to, you know, to stop the violence, stop the looting and stuff like that, because it's not the right way to go about it. And they also fighting a system at the same time, a system that has been designed to oppress them for hundreds of years. And then there are not a lot of people that stop to think about, like, you know, what's next after the protest. Like, what, after all this is done, then what? There's not a lot of people that are actually thinking that kind of stuff. So it's like, this is why history repeats itself, because we're not taking from what has been learned in history, and they're not applying it now. They're just upset. So that's my little 2 cents from someone who's still inside the States. Thank you for hearing me out.
We have Keith and then Ken next. After that, we'll move to the next portion.
Certainly, this is very interesting to me, the comments being shared. Definitely from those who are in it, from the who are in the States. Appreciate the last commentator. I do believe that we have to stand up for injustice. And I don't know, Landy, if this is going to be leading into some of the stuff you want to share at the very end in terms of the Christians' response. But definitely, we ought to be people who are who defend the individuals who cannot defend themselves, and we need to stand up for justice. And that could be done. That could be done with millions of people and extensive crowds. But on the other hand, I don't believe that two wrongs make it right. The looting, and I see the looting being done by both black and white people. Definitely the stealing and the destroying of property could never be justified. You know what I mean? That's akin to saying, oh, you know, I understand why you had to beat up your wife. You know, she pushed you, you know, and you had no choice but to beat her up, you know. You know, I think it's as simple as that. I understand the frustration. I understand that justice must be upheld, and you got to defend the right of blacks. But how it is being done can either take away from the cause or add to the cause. And I believe when it is shown that people are just looting and destroying property, it takes away from the cause.
All right, Ken.
Yeah, just going from when Eric, I know he said he's still living in the States, and he said a statement that when black people get mad, I think it's unfair to say that, because we've seen where when white folks, they've done the same thing. For instance, I think there was a hockey team that won the National Cup, and those dudes tore that city to pieces. So to say blacks tend to loot or fight when an issue arrives is kind of unfair. You know, we, again, like I said, exactly, it's just different cause. I mean, this one, to me, if you ask me, this is, I would respect them doing what they're doing now versus you getting upset over a football game or a hockey game. You know, I just wanted to point it out there. So let's not just put everything on when the blacks get upset, that's what they do. You know, that's just kind of human nature, you know, to a degree.
But I do agree with Brother Keith that two wrongs, whoever said it, that two wrongs don't make a right. You know, I saw videos of the looting, and it, like Eric said, I think some people are just doing it for because they're running with the crowd, or they just want to see what they could get out of it. It's not really for the cause, and I feel like it's just causing more damage than anything else. And they're not those type of people who are just strictly looting to see what they can get, are not really there for the cause. So I don't agree with the looting at all.
So just to give another intervention, my feeling is that, you know, we have to be prudent as Christians in the way we conduct ourselves, certainly. and two wrongs don't make a right. But my bigger point that I was really making earlier too is there is an insidious criminalization of Black people, and this goes back to a racist film, actually, the turn of the 20th century. It's The Birth of a Nation, which basically depicted Black men as predatory, as men who would go out and rape women, and basically criminalize men as bestial, uncontrolled, innately prone to violent crime. And of course, you know, we Black people have for a long time now had to fight these stigmas and stereotypes. And so again, we have to be careful, because I believe the majority of these protesters are doing good. All right, and they're not involved in the kind of things that we're hearing, number 45, or the media, etc., trying to paint or portray them as doing.
All right, thank you all for your input, very valuable. Now we have some questions and considerations, and this way I would like to hear from you as well. And the first one is, to any of you who might have schooled abroad, have you ever experienced racism, whether covertly or overtly? I'd open the floor to anyone who wants to share their experience.
I'll start. I didn't experience it abroad. I've experienced it here with one of my American friends. So basically, like, I was best friends with this girl when I was about like 13 or so, and her brother met me for the first time, and basically he was like, oh wow, she looks like a monkey. So basically I was sheltered in a way where it's like I didn't directly know that, hey, this is racism, but I knew that, hey, this is wrong. But it's crazy because I've seen a lot of posts on Facebook and people talk about their experiences. A lot of people have experienced it.
Right. Anyone else experience with racism, colorism, whether abroad or in the Bahamas?
All right, so I can go now. It was when I was still over there in Houston, when I was coming home to the Bahamas, and I was in the airport. And I was sitting down eating something, and a white lady, she was across the room, stand by the wall, and I get up to throw what I was eating in the garbage. And when I walk past her, she clutched her purse, like she pulled it closer to her. And I just look, and I just shake my head. Because I was like, I just get up, throw something in the garbage. I ain't come to take your purse, be inside the airport. Where could I run? Where could I go? That don't make no sense. So I thought it was funny. And then it was the second incident when I was in Houston, and I had gone to the store. And when I was about to go back home, I had to call a Lyft, but the Lyft was too expensive. So I say, let me walk a little ways and then call it. So I walk, then I end up in the suburbs. And so I get ready to call Lyft. I call it, and there was a Black man who pulled up. This was more so profiling than it was racism. So he pull up, and I look, and I come walk into the car. He look at me, and he speed off. So I was like, what mother said? So I walk to the car again, going to open the door, he speed up again. I say, hold on. I try it again. He speed up again. So I call him. I say, but you see me here, what you keep speeding up for? What happened to you? And he's like, oh, I ain't see you. Come now. So I come to the car. The door was locked. I knock on the window. He open the door. So I sit down and I was like, but you don't see me. I sure you see me walking car. You can't tell me you don't see me. What you keep speeding up for? And he's like, oh, I didn't see you. And I say, you look at me. Then he's like, oh, well, I was expecting someone to come out of the house. I was expecting someone to be standing on the corner. And it's like, a lot of people, when they stand on the corner, they intend to speed to rob you. And I say, I only trying to go home. I ain't trying to rob nobody. That ain't the case. So I just let it there, and that was it.
Appreciate that, bro. I saw Ashton raise her hand.
Yeah. Hey, guys. So I've experienced it in London, in the Heathrow Airport. So me, my dad, and my brother. And if you know my dad and my brother, they're big dudes, and they have a lot of facial hair. So we were walking, leaving the lounge, heading, passing customs and immigration, and the both officers, they were both on either side of the room, looked up at us, and they were like, the two of them run, like they almost run to us to say, hey, come on the side here. We have some questions for you. Questions like, where y'all going, where y'all staying. Mind you, the same time you have like like maybe 20 people who was on like just in the area that we were in walking past. I can't say if I noticed another Black person, but I know, you know, it's like clearly we stand out. We look like, you know, whatever profile they were told to, hey, if you see these kinds of people, these two big dudes, facial hair, Daddy wears a big gold chain. So they're like, you know, ask them some questions because they look, they look suspicious. And when we told them, you know, they dropping me off to school. We're only here for like a couple of days. They're only here for a couple of days and then they go up to Scotland. So, you know, and they were like, okay, anything else? The other officers, like the two officers look at each other, like trying to find something else to question us on. And it was like awkward, you know, and everyone looking at us like, gee, I wonder what they do. And then they let us go. And that was like, that happens often when when I travel to London with my dad. We just expect to be pull on the side because everyone just look at us and be like, okay, they clearly ain't from around here, so let's figure out what they doing here.
Thanks, Ashley. Anyone else? Experiences with racism, colorism, abroad or in the Bahamas?
I have two stories I want to share. One happened a couple summers ago. I don't think this is racism, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I was in my summer clothes. I was in yard clothes. I was driving Landy's car. You all know what Landy's car looks like, right? A little beat up, right? Okay, get that picture, a little Hyundai, kind of old, beat up. And I had dropped Griselda in her violin class, and I was at the corner near Highbury. I was on the corner of Soldier and Robinson Road. And this car pulled up right next to me, and I glanced over at the driver and the passenger. And without me saying a word, the woman turned to me, and she cursed at me and called me a cracker. And you may ask, well, what did I say back to her? And the answer is I didn't say anything. I pulled off when the light turned green, and I went home and I did a big long Facebook post to get whatever was in my head out. I guess that to me, see, that would not be a form of racism. That would be a form of prejudice. Remember, going back to our definitions, it's important because she didn't know me from Adam, but she assumed I was a cracker. And the term cracker, the etymology of the word, it goes back to the U.S. South. And usually someone who's called a cracker is a white, rural, uneducated Southerner. Okay? Now, think about me. If you know me, you know well, obviously I'm white, but I don't fit any other categories of what a cracker would be. All right? But that just goes to show that, you know, because of how people perceive you, I was probably unkept that day. Like now, I hadn't shaved in a while. I certainly was driving a vehicle that didn't look too impressive. So maybe that's why she called me a cracker. But I wasn't in a position, and this is, of course, is the dynamics of race. I am not in a position to argue or to challenge her assumptions, especially at a stoplight in the middle of the road. The second story I'll share happened about 2 weeks ago. Raquel found a guy where she was working as she was volunteering at the South Beach Clinic because of the COVID-19 and all of that. And there was a young guy who was selling coconut water, and he agreed that he would deliver it to our house. So Raquel called me and said, you know, give him directions, blah, blah, blah. I pinned Google Maps to our house. I gave him directions on the phone, waited an hour, and I was wondering, how come he hasn't shown up? He said he was coming right away. Then I get a call from the police, the controller room or whatever, and the woman saying, are you Mr. Curry? Yes, I am. Did you authorize someone to deliver coconut water to your house? Yes, I did. And I was like, she's saying, well, can you verify the color of your house and your name? She was asking me all these questions. After I hung up from this woman, the police officer on the phone, I went outside, and to my surprise, the young man who was trying to deliver my coconut water was being interrogated in our street by not one, but two police officers with two police cars parked in the road. And it turns out what had happened was his phone had died, and in desperation, because he's just trying to make a few dollars, he went around to my neighbors, knocking on the door, hoping that he would get me to come to the door or whatever, and or at least to get a neighbor to give him better directions. I was so appalled by this incident, because to me this was clearly an example of racial profiling. He has a car much like, I guess, the car Landy drives. It's kind of an older beaten up vehicle. He was a young black man in an upscale neighborhood, I suppose. And my neighbors thought that he was knocking on their doors to rob them. And it was amazing because the police, not only did they show up in such extreme presence with the 2 police cars and seemed like a full unit, but they also had someone back in the station calling me not once, but twice about the order that I had put together with this man. It was just so amazing that happened the way it did.
And one of those same neighbors that called the police on that young man also called the police on me a few weeks before that, because I was inside this yard. It was in the nighttime. I was on the phone inside the yard, close by the road, just having a conversation on the phone. And I was bareback. I was in my element. So I just was outside having a phone conversation at night. When all of a sudden this police bus pulled up in the yard, and there was 2 of them inside the yard, and they asked me what I doing in this yard. I said, "Yeah." So they tell me, "Prove it." So I had to go inside, get my ID, bring it back out to them, and they told me that someone called the police on me and said I looked suspicious when I was in my own yard just minding my business. So that should tell you. But Kristen said she had something to say.
Okay, so I have a story. This was on a ladies' retreat we had a few years back, right? We was to Miami, and we went in a department store to go shopping on the break. So after we were finished shopping, we were standing like to the front of the store waiting for the rest of the ladies. And Sister Gwen had a bag that was a little too heavy, so she wanted to double it. So she went back to the cashier and she asked for next bag. So the cashier told her no. And when she was walking off, I was looking at the cashier, telling the next person behind us, pointing at us, saying, "See, look how she trying to steal, asking for a next bag, and she trying to teach the little girl how to steal." They was referring to me. So when I told Sister Gwen that, she went to the cashier and she basically set him straight. Like, she riled the cashier, and she did get the bag, but I guess that's a form like a prejudice or discrimination. Like, he just straight up assumed that we were going to steal, and I guess because we were black, and he was telling that to a white lady. And another story, when we were away on a family vacation, we went inside of a store, and as soon as we went in, I noticed all of the people were staring at us, and they started talking in the next language. And they were like pointing to say, "Oh, follow that one." Like, as we just dispersed around the store, they were pointing to say, "Okay, you follow that one and you follow the next one." So I became uncomfortable and I wanted to leave. And they basically eyed us till we were out the door in the road.
You like that? So this next question, right? How does racism affect the church? Martin Luther King Jr. once said that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week. What do you think he meant by this? Any opinions on that? Do you think racism even exists in the church, in the Lord's body?
In some places, yeah.
Go on, Ramon.
Oh, I think what he means is that while during his time, while more and more Black Americans were slowly, ever so slowly, starting to like work alongside white Americans. However, on Sundays, everybody had their all white, all Black church. Hardly any integration in the church. So while you might have had some minor integration in like the workplace and the public sphere, on Sunday everybody goes to their respective churches, no exceptions.
Precisely.
I want to say this, and this might be a little unsettling for some of you, but the Church of Christ has had a legacy of segregation as well. If you notice, in the U.S. Churches of Christ, you have a lot of black congregations, especially in the South, and then you have a lot of white congregations. Now, there's no law, there's no policy in any of the Churches of Christ that says, we don't allow white people in our church, or we don't allow black people in our church. But there's a culture of exclusion almost. And this does not get talked about in our brotherhood, in our fellowship at all. I'm just being honest. Also, if you notice that there are distinct lectureships that you can attend in the United States, this is a Black Church of Christ lectureship. And there are universities in the US affiliated with a particular racial group. Southwestern in Texas, for example, where Brother Miller went, is considered a Church of Christ university for blacks. At the same time, Abilene in the same state is associated with white Church of Christ members. So what I'm trying to show you is we have a long way to go in the body, in the Churches of Christ, in dealing with race issues. All right, I'm putting that out there, and I'll just say it's my own personal experience. We were really blessed, Raquel and I, when we went to Connecticut, that I found, I went 2 weeks before they did, and found us an apartment, and I also found a Church of Christ that was very multicultural, very multiracial, had a very large minority of Black Americans, and had a large Hispanic community in that church, had a few people from Ghana and Nigeria and a couple of countries in Africa. It was really a diverse congregation. But I will also tell you, in my travels throughout the US, I have had the uncomfortable experience of going to white churches where I just did not feel comfortable being there. I've been to churches too, where I was the only white guy in the congregation. I didn't feel bad though, because I'm used to that at Highbury. But I'm just saying, this is something that we don't talk about.
Appreciate that. Anyone else? Ashton, I see you typed the message. You want to say that?
Yeah, I could say it. I've sensed that segregation at the Lads to Leaders convention as well. Like you could sense you get in that convention hall with these thousands of people. Most are white, and you see them looking at you like, and they don't talk to you. Like it's not a warm, embracing feel. You feel like, okay, I need to go talk to these Black people because we have something in common. Whereas we really don't have that bigger issue here in the Bahamas, white and Black, because we don't have that much, I guess, that much white people that we interact with. But I don't have a problem with white, Black, Spanish, whatever. So when I get there, I'm excited. I want to talk to everybody, and it's, you could feel it. You could feel the tension. Like, please don't talk to me. Please keep moving. don't come over here, but just smile. Keep it moving.
I can attest to that too in my experience with Lads Leaders. I saw Maya raise her hand. Maya, you can go ahead.
Hey, so I wanted to comment on like racism in the Church of Christ. So my grandma, my dad's side, she's basically the one that introduced our family to the Church of Christ, but she's from Alabama. She's from like a small town in Alabama called Kotopa. And when she was baptized into the Church of Christ, the nearest Church of Christ to her was like, no, we don't accept Black people. So they were segregated. And that was when my dad was like 12, which was in 1962. So like there is a history of segregation in the Church of Christ. And it's sad to say that what's going on in the world spills into the church, because like there are certain areas in the United States that if I go to, I know I wouldn't even want to go to a Church of Christ there, just because like I would fear for my safety. But yeah, like I was saying, it's just sad that whatever is going on around us can kind of spill into the Church of Christ, because like there are times where I felt judged because of my race at like, even if it was a mixed church, like I can feel like the stares and the air of prejudice and discrimination against me, even within the Church of Christ.
Very, very good points, Mario. I saw Kenva made a comment about classism and colorism in the church. Do you want to elaborate on that? Kenva or Ramon?
So what I meant by that was, I mean, we know that there are cliques in the church, and when there's fellowship time, we tend to gravitate to our people, so to speak, quote unquote. And while I appreciate that our church, our body isn't like where you have to make an appointment to see the pastor, and I could basically, me as a small fry, go up to one of the elders and say, hi, how are you doing, how are things going? But I think that a lot of people are reluctant to do that, and they will stick within their clique or crew, because I don't know if that's human nature, if that's just how we're set up, but people just gravitate to people of their kind, their class. Like you would, like Ramon said, when it comes to lending money to somebody, for instance, just an example, you would quickly lend somebody money. I would quickly lend somebody money to Keith, Brother Keith, because Brother Keith Holden. Right? I would quickly lend somebody to Brother Keith before I lend somebody money to somebody who doesn't have a job, or I wouldn't say Dario. Come on now. But anyway, I'm just saying, it's just a little form of discrimination, I guess, / prejudice that we all, I guess, have in us. Not all of us, but it's prevalent, and it's there in the church, and you notice it, and it depends on who you are and your class, and I guess how people look at you. I don't know if anybody agrees with me, but that's how I see it sometimes.
May I say something, if I may, or am I on the line waiting for someone to say something before me?
You could go ahead.
Pardon?
Just Kenan and Sister Annette.
Okay, and then me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello?
Go ahead, bro.
This Abishai. But yeah, to the point Sister Kemba was making about how we kind of navigate to people of our kind, that's a way of saying that racial reconciliation has got to begin with the organism. Like, not necessarily the organization, but the organism. Like, you yourself have to go out of your way and try to reconcile with people of different races. So I feel racial reconciliation inside the church and just inside culture as a whole has to start with the person. And we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So we got to talk about things, and we got to elaborate on things that we don't really like to talk about. We got to start having the hard conversations and try to figure out what about your race is kind of different from our race, and just have a meeting and talk about it.
Agree. Who's next?
Sister Anna. Okay, so good night, everyone. I just want to piggyback on the point that Kenva was making. And I do think that when it comes to being prejudicial, I think to some extent we're all guilty of that. So having conversations like these, I think, is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on how we respond to each other, and sometimes the prejudgments we make about others. But I think this is a good conversation also because I can recall my own experience coming to Highbury Park Church of Christ. And to some extent, like I said, I was guilty of that myself. And I realized that I tended to, I guess, interact with the people who seemed to be more like me. And I guess over the years, having been there, coming from the Yellow Elder Church of Christ, I have managed to build relationships. And sometimes I say, oh, well, this person isn't how I thought they were. So that's important. And it's, I guess, the conversations like these are points of reflections for all of us. The one thing though, in terms of maybe blind prejudice sometimes and stereotyping that could be I would say a challenge for the leadership of the Hybrid Church of Christ for consideration would be things like making sure that, for example, when we have people in the church who are sick or who are in need, just reflecting on the fact that when we ask for prayers, we're not calling like some persons on some persons all the time to say, well, don't forget this one in prayer and don't forget that one in prayer. Something happened to this one. And then we do that so much to the exclusion that there may be other people who are going through things, because sometimes I've felt that way when I've seen us, recognizing some persons over and over again to the exclusion of others. One of the things that I was proud of was that the church a couple of years ago, also it seemed even when we had vacancies in the church for jobs, seemingly moving toward the people who were well known, as opposed to a more objective position of advertising the position and making sure that anybody who was able to or competent enough to do the job had the opportunity to apply. And I think that is one of the things that was done the last time around that I think is a good move and something that the church should be mindful of, the leadership in particular, that is the way that we go out, making sure that we're including everybody and putting aside any prejudice or prejudicial thoughts that we may have about somebody's capability. So that's my 2 cents.
I wanted to say something else, and this is particular to our local congregation at Highbury and really in the Bahamas in general. Landy mentioned another term that we haven't talked about tonight, and that's xenophobia. And you must be aware, congregation, our congregation has a lot of persons of Haitian descent. And it really bothers me when I hear public statements that demonize, stereotype, stigmatize persons of Haitian descent or who are from directly from Haiti. I believe we need to be guided by the Bible, and I guess this is probably again going into the last area that I need to cover. But in Galatians chapter 3, it talks about the fact that we're neither Jew or Gentile, we're not circumcised or uncircumcised, we're neither bondmen or free men. We are all one in Christ. And then of course I think about Ephesians 4 verse 4. Where it talks about the fact that there is one faith, one hope, one baptism, one Lord of all. There's oneness in the church, and we're to be united in Christ. And so I constantly have to remind some brothers and sisters who, for whatever reason, have very negative views about our brothers and sisters from Haiti, which I find as a historian very disturbing. Given the diasporic nature of both Haitian and Bahamian persons, having a shared past, in a sense, vis-a-vis the transatlantic slave trade and slavery and colonialism, but yet we disdain them so much as a country. And I'm saying in the church that is absolutely wrong.
All right, so next we have Keith and then Bradley.
Yes, boy, some very good comments. Appreciate the comments from Sister Cash and also Kevin and also Abishai. Something that really struck me with what Abishai said was when he said that we have to get uncomfortable if we're going to make a difference. And we have to toughen up, basically. And Chris, you alluded to the fact that prejudice could develop anywhere. Blacks could be prejudiced against blacks. And haves can be prejudiced against the have-nots, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that really struck me when I was schooling in the States and when I had hair was that there was a time when a woman came up to me. She was from, where was she? She was from Canada, Quebec, but she was a part of the congregation where I worship, which was not totally white. There was some mix there, and you had some minority groups in that at the congregation also. But what she asked of me was unique and interesting. She She came up to me, can I touch your hair? That's when I had hair, folks. That's when I had hair.
Yeah, I believe you, Keith. I believe you.
Huh?
I believe you.
Yeah. can I touch your hair? So what? She wasn't prejudiced or nothing like that. She just never saw or was never that close to a black man to be able to touch his hair, and that freaked me out. That freaked her out, and we were the best of friends going forward. I never saw a red hair, blue-eyed young lady before. When I first saw that in the congregation, I said, "Man, wow!" But after those introductions, we have to be bold enough, courageous enough to get to know people and to go beyond um, um, the perceived perceptions. You know, it may very well be an all-white congregation, but we cannot conclude that all of them are prejudiced. You know, it's just that it may be that they never had an opportunity to cross path with a black individual, and there's some cultural stuff there. But I believe it begins with each one of us saying, you know what, I'm not going to be prejudiced. I'm going to extend the love of Christ. I'm going to be different.
Precisely. Anybody else before we move on to what the Bible
Bradley,
has?
Bradley, have a sign up.
Oh, Bradley.
Okay, after listening to everything, I absolutely agree. We do need to be careful that we're not being prejudiced against people, accusing them of prejudice, because psychologically speaking, humans have biases, we have prejudices. So in a sense, that's kind of embedded in us, but at the same time, you know, we still do need to control our prejudices and watch out for, as Jesus would say, trying to point out the speck in someone else's eye when we have a whole log in ours. And the worst part is when people say, I'm not prejudiced, I'm anti-prejudice. Nah, they've got some prejudice. What happens is sometimes when you talk to them, it comes out eventually. So be careful of that as well. And also learn to distinguish between something that is racist versus, as the gentleman just said, people just not having the opportunity to interact with other people. So for example, a lot of people complain in the US, there's a lot of white people here and everything. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's a predominantly white country. You come to the Bahamas to see a bunch of black people everywhere too. So that's not, that doesn't mean it's not racist, but at the same time, you have to take into consideration other factors before just saying racism as well.
Appreciate that. All right, next slide, Deja. All right, Christian response. The first scripture we look at, and it'll be good if you could write these down as we go or mark them and tag them so you can use them whenever racism comes up in your conversations with your friends or whoever you may come into contact. The first scripture we look at is Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 to 28. And it says, in Christ Jesus, you are all sons of God through faith. For as many as you were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. So this scripture really speaks to unity. Remember, race as a social construct is built to divide human beings into these species, into these different groups, so that one can say they're superior to the other. But in Christ Jesus, we are all one. In Philemon, the book of Philemon, chapter 16, we see where Paul was appealing to Philemon to see his slave Onesimus no longer as a bondservant, but as a beloved brother in Christ. If we go back to the origins of mankind, back in the book of Genesis, we see God created man in his own image. We all come from one man and one woman, Adam and Eve, then there should be no distinctions based on skin color, hair texture. None of these things are really important because we all come from two beings, which is Adam and Eve, and we're all made in God's image. We see in Colossians chapter 3 and 11, basically a reiteration of what is said in Genesis chapter 3 and 26, where there's not Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian or Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and in all. And we see in Acts 10 and 34 that God shows no partiality. What do you mean by partiality? Favoritism, a preference for one over the other. So we are all equal, we are all one. So these very scriptures completely dismantle everything you can say or put forth in support of racism. And what is important to note is Throughout history, the Bible is actually used as a tool to enslave. We know that. But that doesn't mean the Bible supports or condones slavery. And another distinction is important to make too is the chattel slavery in which racism came from is different and distinct from classical slavery. And the example of slavery that we see in the Bible or what is talked about in the Bible. So persons used the Bible and twisted it for their own pleasure to subjugate blacks. White persons did that for the black people, but that doesn't mean the Bible condones or allows slavery or supports it. We see in Revelation chapter 7 and 9, we were talking about Revelation for the past couple of weeks, but John saw a vision of heaven. It says, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands. So if you have people from every nation, from all tribes, peoples, and language, all before heaven, before God in heaven, with white robes on, that goes to show you that we're all equal once again, and there's no race that is superior to another, because the same reward awaits us all once we do what the Lord wills for us. If you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors, according to James chapter 2 and 9. We see partiality translated prosopolemsia, meaning to show favoritism or prejudice, to treat one person as inherently better than the other. Such prejudice is sin. I see Bradley raise his hand. You have a comment?
Yes, you brought up how some people have used the Bible to justify racism and slavery.
Right.
And the interesting is you have not only who we call white people who have done that, but you also have people nowadays, black people who are doing that as well. If you know the black Hebrew Israelites,
Right.
they believe that they're descended from the Israelites and only them will go to heaven. And no one of any other ethnicity, race, or anything like that will be there.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, I've encountered them and their ideology, and I know that I've posted on Facebook and I've shared otherwise in different forums what I would consider as a convincing argument against their views. One of the things I'll just say very quickly is this notion that Christianity is a white man's religion or a European religion is just completely fallacious. Completely. Christianity actually emerged in the Middle East, and if anything, had a great deal of African influence in its founding. One only has to look in Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 8, Acts chapter 11, Acts chapter 12. You have repeated reference to Africans engaged in the work of the early church.
Yes. This next scripture speaks to xenophobia, which Chris highlighted too. And it says, God told his people, you shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Now this is speaking to the Israelites, but this has a very pertinent message for us today too, and how we treat Haitians or any other nationality that may come to our country and dwell in it, whether illegally or legally. Of course, you can't just allow everybody to come in at leisure, but it's how you treat them, how you speak to them. It should be all done in love. That's in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 34. Jesus also taught us that whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Matthew chapter 7 and 12. And then in Matthew 22 and 39, we are told to love our neighbor as ourselves. So all these scriptures we see goes against racism, colorism, prejudice, discrimination, you name it. And finally, in Acts chapter 10, verse 28, Peter testified to the Gentiles who sought to hear the gospel. He said, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. And we know this would have come after Peter would have had the vision with the sheep coming down from heaven with all the different animals on it. And he was instructed to kill and eat, and he refused, saying he should never touch anything that's unclean. And at the end of it, he came to a realization that he should not call anything that God created unclean. And that was for him as much as it is for us today, and that we should not look or despise anyone whether it's based on class, whether we're in a higher class than them. We should not look down on anyone, whether it's our race, our position, our job. We should not look down on anyone because Christ loved us all and views all of us equally. Anyone have any comments on what I've said or want to share or just give any more insight on what was already shared tonight? Anyone? All right, so I'd like to pose the question then. How do we end racism? What is the solution? What do we do going forward? What would be your advice to someone who's experienced racism? How to get them to change their mindset, their ideology? What do we do? I see Eric Ministry's time, so you go ahead.
All right. This is actually something that I've thought about for a while, how to end racism. Well, first, you would have to do away with all the institutionalized and systemic versions of racism. Then you also need to change the hearts of those who consider themselves to be above someone else just because of their skin color or where they may live, certain countries and stuff like that. Then you have to teach the young that they all stand on equal grounds, that they're all human and that you need to love one another as you love yourself and stuff like that. So you have to target the heart of an individual and have them change their hearts, and the only person I know who can truly change someone's heart is Christ. So they need to accept Christ as their savior. They need to change their hearts, change their ways, and then slowly but surely we can see an end to racism.
Thank you, appreciate that. I saw Joshua and then Landy.
Good night, everybody. I feel like we just need to, like Eric said, there needs to be a change of heart. There also needs to be a change in mindset. We need to understand that each person is different from the other. Not because I am a certain way that someone else who is my skin color or has the same type of hair or has similar attributes to me, just because I'm one way doesn't mean that it's the same for them. We need to get to know everyone, and like every time you meet someone, it should be a new experience. Yes, we can have some preconceived notions, but we should kind of keep that to ourselves and just throughout the conversation with them, try to learn about them, try to get to know who they are. The Bible says that eyes have not seen nor ears heard what lies in the heart of the man. So until someone shows you what they're about, you don't know what's going on there. Only them and God knows. So we should kind of just go forward with that outlook to just kind of want to know the person and not to act just because someone of a similar color or race of them has done something in the past. We shouldn't hold them to those things.
Thanks. Landy?
Yeah, with regard to the question, we will not change or end racism. And I do not want to say that as a discouragement. I want to say that we sort of have to accept that some people actually truly hate you. They desire your ill, they desire your hurt, and sometimes only the society and circumstance prevents them from doing the things that are in their heart. That being said, I want to say that it does not stop us from making decisions and conscious decisions, because I appreciate what Abishai said earlier, how that we have to get uncomfortable. I agree with him on that. I had an experience. I had a wonderful opportunity where in my youth, I spent about a couple of months in Japan. And living among the Japanese, their culture was very, very different. For my height, I'm actually considered a very tall person in Japan. I remember going into a food store, going to buy some supplies because I was with a group. And when I came to the cashier, she was like a relatively short person. And she didn't notice that I had come in. And so when she turned to serve me, I was sort of close up on her. And so she had to look up like that, like look up to see me. And she took in a deep breath and she stepped back away from her cash register, and she just stood with her mouth open and away from the cashier. Another cashier actually came and got my stuff and rung up my stuff for me. I found it funny, actually, but she just wasn't exposed. What that non-exposure does is wherever we have the cliques, individuals learn this racism. They learn it. Many learn it from their youth and environment, and they grow up in it. And so that's all they know. We have to make the conscious effort to try to show something different to individuals, share as much as we can, employ as much of the love and consideration that we can towards individuals, just to give them an opportunity to see something different. But be assured, they will not all change. And then I'd like to finally say is at the end of it, we have to know assuredly that there's going to be a judgment at the end, and that the Father is going to use his Son to bring judgment on the earth. So we have to be found not being the ones that are using this race or prejudice, or discrimination to do harm or against our neighbor in the various forms that may take. And I leave with this, just an understanding, and I think, Brother Chris, I've had this argument many times before. Just for the record, there are no black people on planet Earth. Just take something black, put it up against your hand, and you will find that there is a difference in the color. Then take something white, put it up against who we call a white person, and you will find that there is no white human on planet Earth. So we perpetuate certain things unknowingly. There are no black humans. There are no white humans. And just finally, on that matter of the hair, the reason why our hair, as descendants of Africa, why our hair is curled or kinky, as we call it, is because if you cut off the hair and look at it from the top, like a top look down on the hair, the African hair is oval in shape, whereas Caucasian and most Mongoloid hair is round, and that oval shape allows it to curl, all right? And that's how you get the curl. So understanding these differences, and all that is caused just by the movement. If we understand, I think we'll do well. And I end there.
If I could just interject, I think you made a really good point there, Landy. what I would maintain is, agreed, there is no such thing as a black race or a white race. There's a human race. And the point is, going back to the original thing Landy said, remember, race is a social construct which was created by Europeans in the 15th century to subjugate persons of African origin, vis-a-vis the transatlantic slave trade. So we understand it's a social construct. So what we see today is, while it really isn't relevant to the Christian or to a person who understands that it's a social construct, we also appreciate that it still has currency in our culture and country today. What do I mean that? I understand that, for example, as a white Bahamian, I can never, ever use the N-I-G-G-E-R word. In fact, I don't even use the N-I-G-G-A word, even though I know that means something different to us in this country. Because I understand that I'm thought of and perceived as being white, even though we understand there's only one race. Understand that? That's why,
Yes.
yeah. So we understand theoretically and intellectually and all that there's only one race. But we also understand on the ground, on the streets, race still has currency. And we have to act appropriately because of that.
I agree.
I see Bradley, Mark, you raise his hand as we wrap this up.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Dr. Curry said, yeah, we only have one race that's a human race, and it's not really anything other than us that are continually perpetuating the system. I'm not sure where we got this idea from that. Well, let me give context. And the thing about race as a social construct is it's so interesting how people define it. Like some studies will say, well, you tell us what you identify as and we'll take that. Some people would say, oh, a person might have white skin, but if they have one black parent, they're technically black. And I see some white supremacists, when they do DNA tests, they're about as African as we are, even though they have what we classify as pale, Caucasian skin. And I'm wondering, where do people get this idea that, the littlest amount of quote unquote black that you have automatically makes you black, even though you have white skin? Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Curry, but I think it may have to do with how they did segregation. They'd put a bag next to you, or if you could be a white Caucasian and like drink the blood of a black person and then legally you're black. I could be wrong on where that comes from, but
Yeah,
it's shocking.
Yeah, that
That's where it
was
comes from?
the one-drop rule operating in the Jim Crow South, where they would use a paper bag test or even the pencil to determine whether you would pass that test, which was incredibly ludicrous if you think about it. And the kind of testing they did, and going back 8 generations, that's where they call it typically the one-drop rule.
And I found that to be so interesting because I'm thinking, these people out here, Black Lives Matter, anybody else, they're saying, hey, we're here for equality, we're here to get rid of racism. But yet you're using a concept that originates in racism. So step one would be, besides recognizing that race is a social construct with no feasible, reasonable thing for us to use whatsoever, you also have to realize that can we not use the systems that discriminate against people to try and liberate them? That's not going to work. That's all I want to say.
It's a good point. Are there any final comments? Anyone would like to share anything before we close? I appreciate all the insight and comments thus far. Ashton, I see you typing a lot down there. And Kenva, raise the hand. Go ahead.
Hey, it's Ramon. I just wanted to ask Chris a question. Do you think that racism within itself is it always negative? And I say that because I listened to this guy by the name, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with him. The guy's name is Leo Muhammad. He is from the Islamic nation, and he put a twist on it, and I just found it funny. So he was explaining to this group of white and blacks. We were talking about racism. He said, most of you understand racism to be wrong. He said, anytime you have an ist or a prefix or a suffix, that it explains the love that that person has for whatever it is. And he went on to explain, say, a violinist, a scientist, a racist. So he said, Elijah Muhammad had so much love for his race. So it's not that he hated whites, he just loved black. So do you think that is correct, or like what's your feeling?
I think what has happened is a lot of what I would call black nationalist groups, which would include the NOI, it would also include Black Panthers, perhaps, definitely would involve and include Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association. They were often misunderstood, particularly by white liberals who thought that they were anti-white, or that they were spewing hate in their rhetoric and message. What I would argue is they practiced or they believed in self-love. And now obviously they're still operating, I guess as Bradley would suggest, within a construct of race, in that they would talk about loving their own kind, and they would talk about self-reliancy and building up their own economies and not relying on whites for handouts. Actually, all of those ideas and concepts are really good. But again, I would argue then that they're not being racist in loving themselves or loving their community, but maybe they need to find a new language to speak to the universality of the human race. But again, understand that a lot of these movements, these black nationalist groups, are operating in an environment in which there is so much hate towards them. So they're just trying to figure out a way that they can survive and even thrive without engaging the racism of the white supremacists.
Any final comments? Thank you. Okay, if not, I appreciate everyone who came and been a part of this Zoom meeting. It was very engaging and insightful. I appreciate all the comments that you shared, your experiences with racism abroad and here, and as you gave your insight and your own opinions on the matter itself. We appreciate Dr. Curry being here and presenting to us on this very topic, and thank you all for being a part. I turn it over to Keith now.
So I want to thank you, Landy. Thanks, Doc, Dr. Curry. Very, very informative night tonight, and I do hope and pray that everyone was truly enriched and you know, the perspective on racism expanded. I'm going to go ahead and just conclude and ask Ramon. Ramon, we appreciate hearing from you tonight. Can you close it on the word of prayer, my brother, please?
All right, let us pray. Heavenly Father, again, we come to you just thanking you for this dynamic team that put a great topic together. It's definitely timing. Father, help us to take in these things. Help us to continue as Christians to pursue betterness, to pursue equality, to pursue your word as well, Heavenly Father. We ask that you just keep each and every one of us safe. Help us to continue to stay in contact with each other and to look out for one another. We ask all these things in your son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, all the technical support team. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.